Stop it! Leave him alone! Alara's voice, a reedy whisper usually, tore through the night, raw with an unexpected courage she didn't know she possessed. Her grocery bag, filled with a week's worth of meager provisions, slipped from her numb fingers, scattering bruised apples and a dented can of beans across the grimy alleyway. The harsh city lights, usually a comfort, now seemed to mock the scene, casting long, grotesque shadows that danced with the frantic movements of the attackers. 3 hulking figures, their faces obscured by the gloom, and pulled-down hoodies, were relentlessly kicking something, or someone, slumped against a graffiti-scarred brick wall. The sickening thuds echoed in the narrow space, each one a blow to Alara's fragile sense of safety. She hadn't meant to stumble into this. She'd taken a shortcut, just like always, trying to shave a few precious minutes off her long trek home from her third job. A shortcut meant risking the shadowy alleyways, but it also meant getting back to her tiny, cold apartment sooner, where a stack of overdue bills and a dwindling hope for a better tomorrow awaited her. "Hey! I said stop!" Her voice was louder this time, trembling but firm. One of the figures paused, straightening up to turn a menacing glare in her direction. Even in the dimness, she could feel the weight of his hostility, a palpable threat that made her stomach clench. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear back into the anonymity of the city, to pretend she hadn't seen anything. But the pained groan that escaped the crumpled form on the ground, a sound so utterly helpless, rooted her to the spot. It was a sound she knew intimately, a resonance of all the times she'd felt that same despair, that same powerlessness. Her life had been a series of such sounds: the echoing silence after her parents' final argument, the slam of the door as her father walked out, leaving a hollow space in their small, once vibrant home, the rustle of eviction notices, the shrill ring of collection calls, the snide remarks from her wealthy cousins about her choices, as if poverty was a hobby she'd picked up, the sharp sting of her ex-boyfriend's words, dismissing her dreams, her worth, her very existence. "You'll never be anything, Alara. You're too soft, too weak." He'd said it with a sneer, pushing her into the cold, damp earth of self-doubt, leaving her to dig her way out alone. She had always been the one to pick up the pieces, to absorb the blows, to carry the burdens no one else would touch. When her mother fell ill, ravaged by a cruel, swift disease that devoured their savings and her spirit, it was Alara who worked tirelessly, scrubbing floors, waiting tables, anything to keep the lights on, to buy the expensive medications that only prolonged the inevitable. She remembered the day her mother finally slipped away, a tear tracing a path down Alara's cheek as she held her frail hand. "Be strong, my love," her mother had whispered, her eyes already clouded with the approach of death. "Don't let them break you." And Alara had tried. Oh, how she had tried. She had learned to stretch $1 until it screamed, to mend clothes until they were more patches than fabric, to walk miles to save bus fare. She'd swallowed her pride, ignored the pitying glances, and kept her chin up, even when the world seemed determined to grind her down. She was a survivor, a quiet warrior fighting an invisible war against a world that seemed stacked against her. But this was different. This wasn't about her own survival, her own quiet dignity. This was about raw, brutal violence inflicted upon someone else, someone utterly defenseless. The sight of it ignited something primal within her, a spark of defiance that refused to be extinguished. The largest of the attackers, a mountain of a man with a shaved head and a faint scar twisting across his jaw, took a menacing step towards her. "What's it to ya, little girl? Mind your own business unless you want a piece of this too." His voice was a guttural growl, laced with contempt. His companions chuckled, a dark, chilling sound that made the hairs on Alara's arms stand on end. She swallowed, her throat dry, her mind raced, searching for an escape, a plan, anything. There was nothing. Just her, a forgotten alley, and 3 men intent on causing harm. Her gaze flickered to the man on the ground. He was still, disturbingly so, a dark stain spreading slowly on the concrete beneath him. He looked expensive, even in his ruined state, a tailored suit, now torn and bloodied. A watch glinted dully on his wrist, a stark contrast to the rough environment. Whoever he was, He was clearly out of his element, caught in a trap he hadn't anticipated. "He's hurt," she blurted out, her voice cracking. "You're going to kill him!" The scarred man laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. "Good, that's the idea." He took another step, his shadow falling over her, enveloping her in a suffocating darkness. The other two men moved in, flanking him, cutting off her retreat. A wave of pure, unadulterated terror washed over Alara. This was it. This was how her story ended. A forgotten footnote in a dark alley. All the sacrifices, all the struggles, all the quiet resilience, for nothing. Her breath hitched. She squeezed her eyes shut for a fleeting second, bracing for the impact, the inevitable pain. She imagined her mother's voice, a gentle echo, urging her to be strong. But how could she be strong against this? "I wouldn't advise that." The voice was low, smooth, and utterly devoid of emotion, yet it cut through the tense silence of the alley like a razor. It wasn't Alara's voice. It wasn't one of the thugs. It was a new voice, emanating from the shadowed mouth of the alley. A voice that carried an undeniable weight of authority, a dangerous calm. All three attackers froze, their casual menace replaced by a sudden, palpable tension. Their heads swiveled towards the sound, their previous arrogance replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Alara, her eyes still squeezed shut, cautiously opened them, peering through her lashes. Standing at the alley's entrance, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of a distant street lamp, was a man. He was tall, impossibly so, and his presence seemed to suck all the air out of the narrow space. His suit, impeccably tailored even in the dim light, was a dark, expensive fabric that seemed to absorb the shadows rather than reflect them. His face was sharp, chiseled, framed by dark, slicked-back hair that gleamed like polished obsidian, but it was his eyes that truly held her captive, eyes like chips of granite, cold and unyielding, that seemed to see through the very fabric of the night, straight into the souls of the men before him. He was not looking at Alara. His gaze, colder than any winter night, was fixed on the three thugs, and then, slowly, deliberately, his eyes swept down to the crumpled form on the ground, the man Alara had tried to protect. A muscle twitched in his jaw, a barely perceptible movement, but it was enough to send a shiver down Alara's spine. This man, this stranger, who had just materialized, radiated a quiet, dangerous power, an aura of control that was both terrifying and, inexplicably, a little bit thrilling. The largest attacker, the one with the scar, seemed to shrink under the stranger's gaze. "Look, pal, this ain't your business. Just keep walking." His voice, once a growl, was now laced with a nervous edge. The stranger didn't respond with words. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate step into the alley, then another. Each step was measured, unhurried, yet it felt like the approach of a predator. He moved with an effortless grace that belied his imposing stature. The air in the alley crackled with an unspoken threat, a palpable tension that made Alara's teeth clatter. "He is my business," the stranger finally said, his voice still low, almost a whisper, but it resonated with a steel that made the thugs visibly flinch. He gestured with a subtle flick of his wrist towards the injured man on the ground. "And you three just made a very grave mistake." Before the thugs could even register the full weight of his words, the stranger moved. He was a blur of motion, too fast for Alara's eyes to follow. One moment he was standing, the next he was an unstoppable force. The scarred man, who had seemed so formidable just moments ago, found himself suddenly airborne, a gasp torn from his lungs as the stranger's fist connected with his jaw. The crack of bone was sickeningly loud in the confined space. The man hit the wall with a sickening thud, then crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Alara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. It had happened so fast, with such brutal efficiency. The other two attackers, momentarily stunned by the sheer speed and force of the assault, started to back away, a desperate fear dawning in their eyes. But the stranger was already on them. He moved like a dancer, a deadly ballet of controlled violence. One thug tried to swing a fist, but the stranger effortlessly blocked it, twisting the man's arm with a swift, sickening crunch. A scream of pain ripped through the night as the man dropped to his knees, clutching his mangled limb. The third thug, seeing his companion so brutally dispatched, made a desperate lunge for the alley entrance, his only thought to escape. But the stranger was faster. He intercepted him with a brutal kick to the back of the knee, sending the man sprawling. Before he could recover, the stranger's foot pressed down on the back of his neck, pinning him to the ground. "Who sent you?" the stranger demanded, his voice now a low growl, devoid of any of its previous calm. The man on the ground whimpered, his face pressed into the grimy concrete. "I don't know, please! I swear, I don't know!" The stranger pressed down harder. "Try again!" Alara watched, mesmerized and terrified. This man was not a hero from a storybook. He was something far more dangerous, far more real. There was a cold, calculating ruthlessness in his every movement, a chilling efficiency that spoke of long experience with violence. He wasn't just protecting, he was punishing. The pinned thug choked out a name, barely audible. The stranger paused, his foot still planted firmly, then slowly released the pressure. He stood up, his gaze sweeping over the three incapacitated figures, a look of utter disdain on his face. He then turned, his granite eyes finally meeting Alara's, and in that moment, time seemed to stretch, to warp. She had expected anger, perhaps annoyance at her interference. Instead, his gaze was unreadable, intense, piercing. It felt as if he was looking not just at her, but into her, seeing every vulnerability, every fear, every silent sacrifice she had ever made. A strange heat bloomed in her cheeks. She, who had always been invisible, always overlooked, was now the sole focus of this terrifying, powerful man. He took a step towards her, and Alara unconsciously recoiled, a small gasp escaping her lips. He stopped, a flicker, was it concern, crossing his otherwise impassive features. He looked down at the bruised apples and scattered groceries at her feet. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice softer now, though still deep and resonant. It was the first time he had directly addressed her, and the sound of it, after the brutal symphony of the alley, was jarringly gentle. Alara shook her head, still trying to process the whirlwind of events. "No, I'm fine, but he..." She gestured vaguely towards the man on the ground, the original victim. The stranger followed her gaze, his expression hardening once more. He knelt beside the injured man, his movements precise and careful. He gently checked the man's pulse, then his head, his fingers tracing the contours of the man's face. He then removed his own pristine jacket, folding it carefully before placing it beneath the injured man's head. A surprisingly tender gesture from such a ruthless individual. He pulled out a sleek black phone from his pocket and made a call, his voice low and commanding, speaking in a language Alara didn't understand but recognized as Italian. He rattled off instructions, his tone leaving no room for argument. Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens grew louder, not police sirens, but the distinct muted sound of an ambulance. And then, the heavy thrum of approaching engines, not official vehicles, but powerful, expensive cars. As he finished the call, he looked up at Alara again. "You intervened," he stated. "Not a question, but an observation." "Why?" Alara swallowed. "They were hurting him. He was defenseless." She hesitated, then added, "It didn't feel right to just walk away." A faint, almost imperceptible nod. Most people would have. His gaze lingered on her, a thoughtful intensity in his dark eyes. "You have a strange courage, little bird." Little bird. The unexpected endearment, from this formidable man, sent another jolt through her. It was a term of fragile beauty, so at odds with the brutal efficiency she had just witnessed. If you've ever wished someone strong would step in when no one else would, when you felt utterly alone and vulnerable, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. Because Alara's story is about to take a turn you won't believe. A collision of worlds that will redefine everything she thought she knew about love, danger, and the true meaning of protection. Soon, two dark SUVs, sleek and silent, pulled into the alley entrance, their headlights cutting through the gloom. Two men, just as immaculately dressed as the stranger, emerged from the lead vehicle, their faces stern and watchful. They quickly moved to secure the area, their eyes sweeping over the incapacitated thugs with a practiced indifference. A third car, A luxury sedan also arrived, from which two men in paramedics' uniforms swiftly emerged, their medical bags clutched in their hands. They moved with a practiced efficiency, immediately attending to the injured man on the ground. The stranger remained beside Alara, his presence a solid, comforting anchor in the chaos. He hadn't introduced himself, but there was no mistaking his authority. The other men, paramedics and enforcers alike, moved with an almost deferential respect in his presence, their gazes occasionally flickering to Alara with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "He will be taken care of," the stranger said, his voice cutting through her thoughts. "Thank you for your intervention." His gaze returned to her, a slow, deliberate assessment that made her skin tingle. "You put yourself at risk." I couldn't not do anything," Alara murmured, feeling a strange mixture of embarrassment and pride under his intense scrutiny. She suddenly felt very aware of her own appearance, her faded coat, her worn shoes, the stray strands of hair that had escaped her hurried braid. She was a stark contrast to the polished, dangerous world that had just enveloped her. He nodded slowly, a rare quality. He then turned to one of the men who had emerged from the SUV. He spoke a few rapid words in Italian, and the man nodded, his eyes darting to Alara. "My driver will take you home," the stranger said, turning back to her. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order, delivered with an undeniable finality. "It's too dangerous for you to walk alone after this." Alara opened her mouth to protest, to say she was fine, that she always walked home, but the words caught in her throat. His eyes, dark and unwavering, brooked no argument. Besides, a part of her, a deep, tired part, craved the unexpected solace, the momentary reprieve from her endless struggle. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. He simply nodded again. He watched as the paramedics carefully loaded the injured man onto a stretcher, and as his men efficiently secured the three unconscious thugs, hauling them into the back of one of the SUVs. The scene was executed with a chilling precision that spoke volumes about the nature of these men and their leader. As the alley cleared, he walked her towards the remaining SUV, a gleaming black beast that seemed to hum with suppressed power. The driver, a formidable man with a stoic expression, opened the back door for her. Before she could climb in, the stranger paused, his hand gently but firmly taking her arm. "I am Dante," he said, his voice a low rumble, finally offering his name. His thumb brushed lightly against her skin, sending an unexpected jolt through her. "And I owe you a debt, Alara." Alara. He had remembered her name, even after all the chaos. Her heart fluttered in her chest. "You don't owe me anything, Dante. You saved me too." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of his lips, a fleeting glimpse of something warmer beneath the granite facade. "Perhaps we saved each other, little bird." His eyes held hers for another long moment, a silent promise hanging in the air, before he released her arm and gestured for her to get into the vehicle. The ride home was surreal. The plush leather seats, the hushed interior, the silent, efficient driver. It was a world away from the rattling buses and crowded subways she usually endured. She stared out the tinted window, watching the familiar streets whiz by, feeling utterly disconnected from her usual reality. Dante's words echoed in her mind. "Little bird, I owe you a debt." Who was he, this man who commanded such loyalty and ruthlessness, who moved with such dangerous grace, and yet showed her an unexpected tenderness? The SUV pulled up outside her dilapidated apartment building, a stark contrast to the sleek vehicle. The driver opened her door, his expression impassive. "Thank you," Alara said, stepping out onto the cracked sidewalk. As she reached for her scattered groceries, the driver reached down first, gathering them meticulously, even picking up the dented can of beans, and placed them gently in her arms. It was a small gesture, but it touched her profoundly. "Mr. Alighieri will be in touch," the driver stated, his voice devoid of inflection. Then, with a quiet click, he closed the door and drove away, leaving Alara standing alone on the sidewalk, holding her humble groceries, her world irrevocably altered. Days turned into a week. Alara returned to her routine, but it felt hollow, unreal. The memory of Dante, of the alley, of the brutal efficiency, and the unexpected gentleness played on a constant loop in her mind. She expected to never hear from him again. She was just a fleeting moment in his undoubtedly complex, dangerous life, a little bird he'd briefly noticed. Then, a knock on her door. Not the tentative rap of a neighbor, nor the insistent pounding of a bill collector. It was a firm, measured knock that resonated with authority. Hesitantly, she opened the door, her heart leaping into her throat. Standing in her narrow hallway was a man, impeccably dressed, holding a small, elegant box. "Miss Petrova?" he asked, his voice polite but unyielding. "A delivery from Mr. Alighieri." Inside the box, nestled on a bed of velvet, was not what she expected. Not money, not a lavish gift. It was a beautifully engraved silver locket, intricate and delicate, with a tiny, exquisite bird sculpted into its surface. It was a silent, powerful reminder of his words, and with it, a small card. Her name, written in elegant script, and a single handwritten word in Italian, "Protetta," protected. Her fingers trembled as she touched the locket. Protected, the word resonated deep within her, stirring a long dormant longing for safety, for a haven. She'd always been on her own, always fighting. The idea of being protected by someone, especially someone as formidable as Dante, was both terrifying and utterly captivating. The delivery was followed by another, then another. Not gifts exactly. Small, practical improvements to her life that seemed to materialize out of thin air. Her broken refrigerator was suddenly replaced with a new, humming model. A persistent leak in her ceiling mysteriously vanished. The menacing stack of overdue bills she had hidden in a shoebox simply disappeared. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet profoundly impactful. Dante was making good on his silent promise, on his debt. He was weaving himself into the fabric of her life, without a word, without a direct encounter. Then came the invitation, an actual formal invitation, delivered by the same stoic man to a gala, a charity event for an organization she'd never heard of, hosted by Dante Alighieri. Panic flared. A gala! Her! She had nothing suitable to wear, no experience in such opulent settings. Her life was about survival, not societal graces, but the locket, clasped around her neck, felt heavy, a tangible link to the man who had woven himself into her thoughts. A strange mix of fear and curiosity urged her on. She had to see him again, to understand. When the night of the gala arrived, Alara found herself in front of a mirror, staring at a dress she didn't recognize. It had been delivered to her apartment 2 days prior, a shimmering midnight blue gown of exquisite silk, accompanied by delicate silver heels, and a note that simply said, "For the little bird." It fit perfectly, clinging to her curves in a way that made her feel both exposed and exquisitely beautiful. Her usual plain ponytail was transformed by the skilled hands of a hairdresser, who had also mysteriously appeared at her door, sent by Mr. Alighieri, into an elegant cascade of curls. She looked at her reflection, a stranger gazing back at her, a woman of understated elegance, not the tired, invisible girl she usually saw. The ride to the venue was in yet another sleek, silent car. When it pulled up to the grand entrance of a magnificent ballroom, Alara's breath hitched. Limousines lined the curb, paparazzi cameras flashed, and a parade of men and women in designer gowns and bespoke suits flowed into the building. She felt a familiar tremor of inadequacy, the echo of every past humiliation, every snide remark about her poverty. This wasn't her world. She didn't belong. But then, as she stepped out of the car, a hand, strong and warm, closed around her elbow. She looked up, and her gaze met Dante's. He was even more imposing, more breathtaking, in person, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean power of his frame. His dark eyes, usually so cold, held a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher. Admiration? Possession? "Alara," he murmured, his voice a deep velvet caress that sent shivers down her spine. "You look exquisite." His words, simple yet profound, chased away every last vestige of her self-doubt. In his eyes, she was not the girl from the alleys, not the girl who struggled to pay rent. In his eyes, she was beautiful. He led her into the ballroom, his hand a constant reassuring presence at her back. The opulent hall, filled with glittering chandeliers and a sea of elegantly dressed people, would have overwhelmed her alone, but with Dante by her side, a strange sense of calm settled over her. He was a king in this world, and he moved through it with an effortless, almost arrogant confidence. Whispers followed them, curious glances, hushed conversations. Everyone knew who he was, and now, everyone was wondering who she was, the woman at his side. He introduced her to no one, nor did he need to. His mere presence with her was enough. He held her gaze often, a silent conversation passing between them that transcended words. He would lean in, occasionally, to whisper a comment, a dry observation about the opulent crowd, and a genuine smile would grace his lips, a rare sight that made Alara's heart flutter. Later, as they stood on a secluded balcony overlooking the city lights, the sounds of the gala a distant hum, Dante turned to her, his expression serious. "I saw your courage that night, Alara," he began, his voice low. "Your strength. You were willing to face down 3 dangerous men for a stranger." Alara looked down at her hands, suddenly shy. "I just did what I thought was right. Most people do not," he corrected softly, then gently lifted her chin with his finger, forcing her to meet his intense gaze. "I am not a man who forgets a debt, Alara, nor am I a man who allows harm to come to those I care for." His thumb stroked her cheek, a feather-light touch that ignited a spark deep within her. "You are important to me, little bird. More than you know." The unspoken weight of his words hung in the air, thick with unspoken promises, with a dangerous, forbidden intimacy. She was a woman who had always been alone, and he was a man who commanded an empire. Their worlds were poles apart, yet here, under the cloak of the night sky, they converged. He stepped closer, his body radiating a heat that warmed her to the core. His dark eyes searched hers, a raw intensity that both frightened and thrilled her. "Tell me, Alara, what do you truly desire? What have you been denied?" The question caught her off guard. She had never allowed herself to dream, to truly desire. Survival had been her only goal. But now, with Dante's gaze fixed on her, with the promise of his immense power swirling around them, the long-buried desires began to surface. "Safety," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "A place where I don't have to fight to exist. A place where I can be myself, without judgment." And then, bolder, fueled by a sudden surge of courage, and, to be seen, truly seen, a slow, possessive smile spread across Dante's lips, a chillingly beautiful sight. He leaned in, his breath warm against her ear, sending shivers down her spine. "You are seen, Alara, more than you could ever imagine." His arms snaked around her waist, pulling her flush against his hard, muscled body. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that echoed the rapid pulse in her own ears. "And safety," he murmured, his voice a low, seductive rasp. His lips brushed against her earlobe, sending a jolt of electricity through her. "Consider it done. From this moment on, Alara, you are mine, mine to protect, mine to cherish, mine to keep safe from all the ugliness this world can throw at you." He pulled back just enough to meet her gaze, his eyes burning with an unshakable resolve, a fierce possessiveness that both terrified and thrilled her. "No one will ever hurt you again, little bird, not while I breathe, and anyone who tries will answer to me." He lowered his head, his lips hovering just inches from hers, the promise of a kiss, of a claiming, hanging heavy in the air. "You saved me, Alara, in a way you don't understand, and in return, I will build you a sanctuary, an empire, if you wish. Anything you desire, it is yours, my world, my protection, my everything. Just say the word." Her breath hitched, his words, a vow whispered in the shadowed intimacy of the balcony, wrapped around her like a silken, dangerous thread. This was not just protection, it was an absolute claim, a surrender she had never imagined, yet now, under his intense gaze, felt terrifyingly, exhilaratingly right. "Mine," he whispered again, his lips finally descending, claiming hers in a kiss that was both gentle and fierce, a promise of a future she had never dared to dream of, a world where the feared Mafia boss would be her shield, her sanctuary, her undoing, and her salvation.